Keepers of Washington County. We're an all-volunteer nonprofit that was created in 2021, and our mission is to protect and advocate for trees in urban Washington County. And the way we do that is through community education and talks like tonight. We also do fun guided walks, very educational, but also gives you context to see the trees in your community. We do ivy pools, and then our website is amazing as a resource if you're looking for information about tree care and the situation in Washington County. Please visit the website. And then on this slide, you'll see some of the upcoming events we have. So we have ongoing ivy pools, walks, and tree conversation. And then our advocacy work involves testimonials, sponsoring petition for a tree, for tree protection, and then following developments across the county, as well as working with citizen groups to empower them to take action. So again, I encourage you to visit our website to learn more about our organization. And now I'd like to turn it over to Christine, who's going to talk for about an hour. We'd ask that maybe you hold your questions because she's got quite a rich presentation, and some of your questions may get answered. But we'll definitely have time at the end to take questions, both from the folks in the room, but also those online. So that you and again, thank you for your patience.
Yes? Okay. Thank you so much for having me. So I'm from the Oregon Department of Forestry. We have a forest health unit that covers the state. We look at insects, diseases, abiotic issues such as storm damage, drought, etc., human-caused damage, wildfire, whatever's harming trees in the landscape, urban and rural. We want to know about it. We want to tell you about it. We also want you to tell us what you're seeing. A lot of times when we start getting a lot of reports from folks in the community, we start going, okay, that's something we need to look at because we had not seen that before, or we weren't looking at that time. We do conduct a lot of ground and aerial surveys, so that we are looking statewide, but it's a big state, there's 4 of us. So we definitely need folks like yourselves that have your eyes on the ground and see things from year to year that maybe something looks different one year. We want to know about that. So hopefully everybody on Zoom can hear me okay. If you cannot see the presentation, it's been sent as a PDF. There are a lot of resource links here. I certainly don't expect you to jot them down, and there will not be a test at the end, so you can look at those all later. I do have a lot of slides, so I want to breeze through some of them a little bit more quickly, and you can already tell you can look at the slide. But for this group right here, I want to cover the most pressing topics. And so the first thing I want to say before we start is that most of our insects are beneficial. They're native, they're widespread, they should be there, they're part of a functioning ecosystem. Oftentimes when we have stress trees, these native insects can build up in those stress trees and finish off the stress trees. We want to push out the old, making room for the new, or making room for the healthier trees. However, one of the things that's been stressing trees across our landscape is drought. And so that is typically the primary factor affecting trees. And then the native widespread insects that we have kind of build up in those trees and finish them off, sometimes on a larger scale and spilling over into such a large number of healthy trees that they can actually kill those trees. And that's when that becomes a problem. So we are tackling drought and what folks can do to plant the right thing in the right place at the right density, reducing competition for things such as ivy, such as blackberry, trying to get those trees the best shot. What I'm going to talk about today, though, is two non-native insects. These are situations in which the tree and the insect did not co-evolve together. So that tree did not grow up with that insect and develop defenses against that insect. So these native trees that I'm going to discuss here today are under threat from the invasive insects that we just recently detected in Oregon. And so that's why they're impacted by these insects far more than they are than the native insects that are also present in these trees and are not a problem. So the 2 insects I'm going to talk about today are emerald ash borer, which primarily affects ash trees, and then the Mediterranean oak borer, which primarily affects oak trees. Now I will use interchangeably emerald ash borer and EAB and Mediterranean oak borer and MOB. I apologize for the acronyms, but these are mouthful words, so I will probably use those words interchangeably. First one we're going to talk about is the one to the left, and I have samples here today that I want to show you what the damage actually looks like and what the insect actually looks like. Even if you don't often see the insect on the landscape, which you won't, because it's not commonly present outside the tree for much of a year, I want you to know that this insect right here is not really 6 to 8 inches long, as I'm showing on the screen. I want you to see that it's actually very small. Next slide, please. So starting with emerald ash borer, or EAB, it was first detected in Oregon in 2022 in Forest Grove, the city of Portland. Staffer actually called me and said, hey, something's not looking right. I just picked up my kid from after school care and all these ash trees are dead. And I see green needles flying around and one landed on my kid. Looks like EAB. He knew what EAB looked like. I head out there, just the call I wanted to get on a Friday, on the day that I don't work, on a holiday weekend, to bring it home and find out, yes, in fact, it's something that we had been waiting for to arrive in the state. It was, in fact, emerald ash borer. So we already had a plan in place. I knew exactly who I needed to notify and to get a secondary verification and what we needed to do moving forward. Because we already had a preparation plan for emerald ash borer. We learned a lot from other states that have had it, and we built our plan based on what worked for them and what didn't work, and we knew what partners should be involved. So this is the parking lot. You can see all those ash trees not looking so good. Typically, ash doesn't look great in a parking lot, especially if it's native, because it's a pretty dry site. That's not what they love. However, these were heavily infested with emerald ash borer, and by the level of damage, so you can see the bottom left picture, they've eaten away the cambium and the outer layers of the softwood. They had been there for at least a few years. We tried to do a trace back. We didn't. We don't know where it came from. We traced back all the way over these trees and come from a couple decades previous, or about 15 years previous to that. We do not know how this insect got here, but these insects do move readily, and so it's just a matter of time, I think, until they got here. But we are still investigating where else it might be present in the state. Right now, it's still just concentrated in Washington County. Next slide. So, as I mentioned, this insect is present in eastern states. So it came over from overseas and it attacked ash trees. We first found it in Canada, the eastern part of Canada, and then we started to find it in Detroit. Starting in 2002, that's when it was first found. However, the level of damage indicates that maybe it had been there since the 90s. And so that's very common with invasives, that they lurk in the background until they build enough populations where they can be damaging. And actually have an impact on the landscape that we can visibly see. So it's often a few years after it's arrived that we then see that there's an impact. And so once it was detected in those eastern states, it spread quickly from state to state. A quarantine was set right outside those eastern states. However, it jumped that quarantine and it made it to Colorado in 2013. And then in 2019, it had reached 33 states. And as of now, it's in 36 states, including now Oregon. It's the first detection west of Colorado which was detected in 2022. They've since found some other areas. Now, just because you're not seeing these other western states showing infestation by EAB doesn't mean it's not there. They may have not found it. They may not have the staff to look for it. So likely it didn't just hop over in one fell swoop from Colorado. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we've only detected it in Washington County. Right now, that square miles jumped up a bit. I forgot to update that, apologies. So I think it's around 10 square miles that it's at now. But there is a map, the link is at the end of this presentation, so you can follow along where it is spreading. And there is a quarantine around Washington County. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Next slide. So how do these things get here? Well, from overseas, it's usually through shipments. That's very common. There are border patrols that check the shipments, but there's a lot that's coming through. It's really easy to miss things. And then they can travel from state to state through who? Humans, usually firewood, nursery stock. Those things aren't being inspected at all. They move freely throughout the country. And so one of the main things that we try to establish is not to move firewood. Buy it where you burn it. So try not to move this firewood around is going to aid in our prevention of this insect spreading as well as other insects that are invasive on our landscape. Next slide. So the type of damage that this insect does is basically 100% destruction of ash trees that are not treated with a preventative insecticide. I'll talk more about those insecticides. When it comes into an area, these trees are not defended. All of the 16 ash trees that are present are native to the U.S. are susceptible to emerald ash borer in feeding trials. Oregon ash, our only native ash, is especially tasty and they develop especially well on the species. We also have some non-natives, usually in our urban, in our urban landscapes. They're also susceptible to this insect. This insect has killed over 100 million trees. And in this picture, what I'm showing you is an aerial survey image in which there are a bunch of trees that it looks like it's winter and they're just deciduous. However, it's not. There's greenery in the surrounding areas because those trees are not ash. All the deciduous trees, they're fully leafed out, but the ash trees have been killed. And so all those ash trees are dead in that area. This insect has never been successfully eradicated. And in Oregon, we learned a lot from other states to not waste our efforts on trying to get rid of the insect completely. Sure, initially in that parking lot, I said, let's destroy these trees, and we did. But that doesn't mean that we solved the problem. They have already moved on from that area. Complete elimination of this insect is a waste of time and money. Just the way that its biology works, it doesn't indicate that it's attacked the tree until later, and the tree is already damaged, so we're late to the game. The fact that it's underneath the bark, it's hard to attack it once it's already in the tree. So we're not trying to eradicate. What we're trying to do is buckle down and save what trees we can using preventative insecticides that prevent the insect from killing those trees. And some other projects to try and preserve this tree on landscape, as well as reducing the population of this insect just simply so it can't spread as quickly or as far. It flies more design for a plant than the other trees. So we haven't given up on ash just yet. We do have a lot of things in place. And this is going to come at high economic, ecological cost, which you can assume, and I'll get into that next slide. So on the left, you'll see a tree-lined street and mostly ash trees, and then just 3 years later, emerald ash borer has killed those trees. So obviously, in urban landscapes, that's going to have a huge economic negative impact. It's also going to be very impactful on just the greenery on our urban landscapes. You know, we need these things. These are ecological islands that we have here, and that's losing those trees. And so that's especially going to impact communities that don't have the money to come in and destroy infested trees and replace them. They may destroy them, they may not have money to replace them. So we do have some programs in place to try and provide lower income communities with money to try and combat this insect. However, this is going to be very expensive. Next slide. So just in the Portland example, about 5% of the trees, street trees, are ash. And so that cost has been estimated at $50 million for removal and replacement of those trees. And that's for a city, our largest city, that has the funds to be able to do something like that. So there are a lot of other communities that simply won't be able to do that and are going to be losing a lot of trees in their landscape. Portland and various other cities do have a tree plotter program. We have a link to that on our website that different communities around Oregon have involved themselves in this tree plotter, determining where ash trees are present, and then reporting back what, how many ash trees we have, and then putting them into a formula to determine what the cost might be for removal or replacement, just to get an idea about if emerald ash borer comes into an area, how much will it cost for a community. Next slide. So ash is primarily a west side species, or native ash. It is planted in urban areas in the eastern part of our state, and we do have some other populations, sometimes in areas you wouldn't expect it. Ash is a very common tree, especially in areas that have very extreme conditions, meaning very dry and also very wet, depending on the time of year. It's our only native species that can withstand totally dry soil and then wet soil in the same year. So for that reason, losing this tree in this habitat means that we would not have another native replacement tree. There might be some non-natives, but that's something we're hesitant to put out across the landscape on a larger scale is way more. So really good at damaging, losing ash trees in some of these really special habitats. Next slide. So it's our only native ash tree, Oregon ash, as I mentioned. It's very important in riparian areas. Typically, wherever you see ash, even in the middle of summer, you know that that's at least an ephemeral spring area. There is a water source that supports it for at least part of the year. And so it's protecting that water source, providing shade, also providing bank stability, and protecting those little pockets of habitat. And habitat with threatened and endangered species. It's also a good product for some specialty markets. And it's a cultural resource. It's utilized for things like paddles by our indigenous tribes. So really essential species that we have in our landscape. Next slide. This is a really common site, especially as you're driving down I-5 through the Willamette Valley. We have a lot of agriculture, and then we have fragmented forests, and we have a lot of pockets of 100% ash, because that's the only tree that can withstand those conditions of totally dry and then totally wet. What else is going to replace it? We're losing that tree cover in those pockets of habitat and all of these agricultural areas. So as I drive through the valley now and I see these pockets and imagine them gone, what are we going to put there? So that is something that we're working on, but it's a pretty big uphill battle. Next slide. So I don't think I need to go into as much detail with this group on how to identify an ash, but I'm going to do it real quick and dirty anyway. So I think if you hit next slide, the arrows will come up. There we go. All right, so ash has a compound leaf, meaning a whole bunch of little leaflets on one leaf stem. That's what we see in the bottom left, as opposed to like a maple that has a single leaf on a single leaf stem. And hit next, please. It also has opposite branching, where off that main stem, the branches are symmetrical rather than kind of laddered up and alternate. And so those are two key features to identify ash trees. However, there are other things that look similar, especially some non-natives on our landscape. We have a lot of different things that can replicate this. But remember, this is typically a tree form. It's not a bush form, so that can help distinguish any lookalikes. As it gets older, it has very furrowed bark that's kind of lattice or diamond shaped. And there are female versions of the trees that have a single wing pattern. And so these Samara seeds are just one pattern rather than a maple that's two. So these can be some identifying features in determining if it is ash. When it's winter time, the leaves have dropped, it's really distinct to see all of these ash trees with their symmetrical branching. That opposite branching looks like a pitchfork up against the sky, and you can pick out an ash tree from a long distance. Next slide. Mountain ash, not a true ash. I just want to mention that. Next slide. Okay, now the insect itself, and I'm going to pass out samples starting now. I do want to be clear that you probably won't see this insect. You'll probably see the damage from the insect or signs of symptoms leaving behind, but not the insect itself. They don't spend much of their time outside of the tree. When they pop out of the tree, they nibble on a leaf a little bit, they mate, they die. They lay eggs, sorry, that's the second piece of mating. They lay eggs, then they die. They don't live very long as adults, and so we might not see them if you do. They're typically flying around the canopy higher up where they can get more sun exposure. But I want to pass out two examples, and one is emerald ash borer, and then our natives that are not emerald ash borer that are often called in incorrectly. But first, a little bit of detail about its biology. This is a wood boring type of beetle. Typically, wood borers dive deeper into the wood, not this insect. That's why it's so damaging. It stays on the outer part of the wood, and that is the most living, active, growing tissue. And so it's essentially cutting the veins of the tree back and forth. It's girdling the tree. That's how it can kill the tree so successfully. Rather than just diving past those living tissues, it cuts back and forth with an S-shaped, curving feeding gallery from the larvae. So the eggs are laid on the outside, they hatch as a larvae start growing in, they feed and grow, and feed and grow, and then they will pupate, sometimes getting closer into the bark, or actually within the bark, and then they will exit out by chewing their way out as an adult. And when they chew their way out, they leave a D-shaped hole because that's the shape of their body. It's rounded on one side and flat at the bottom. Those D-shapes can look a little oval or round depending on the angle they're coming out, but typically it's more D-shaped. This insect prefers ash. It can also feed on other members of the ash family or olive family, such as cultivated olive, branch tree, but primarily it's going after ash. So now I'm going to pass out the insect. The one with the bigger beetles, not emerald ash borer. So the keys to look for are that emerald ash borer is all over green. There's no other colors. There are no ridges. There are no hairs. There are no bumps or spots. It's all over green. When it opens its wings, you'll see a flash of orange. Don't worry about that. Look at its back, it's all over green, versus the other insects in the not EAB box. You'll see some different colors, ridges, they're more robust. This is a very skinny insect. Now, you're not entomologists, I don't think, but I wouldn't expect anybody to find a green beetle and automatically remember what they saw here tonight. But I just wanted to show those to you because that really large beetle especially, 90% of the time we get reports it's that beetle, and that is the golden view crested. It's native and widespread. We want to keep it on our landscape. So as long as you can remember EAB, it's not robust, it's skinnier, then please don't kill the robust beetles. Next slide. The life cycle, as I mentioned, this is a little bit of a complicated slide, so I'll just mention it goes right under the bark, it cuts back and forth along the cambium and sapphire. That's the outer layers of wood. It doesn't burrow very deep, and then it injects out. Next slide. Again, I'll brief past this. It's typically 1 year life cycle, sometimes 2 years if it's cold, colder than usual, or the food quality is lower, so it takes longer for them to get the nutrients they need. Next slide. So again, there are lots of things that look like EAB. If you are reporting, and I'll put the reporting website at the back of this presentation, make sure you look at this lookalikes poster. That link is also on the presentation. Just make sure that you can dispel some other things. We only have a few staff looking at all these reports, so we're really trying to inform people what it does and does not look like. Next slide. What's most important is determining when a tree is stressed. First, is it an ash tree? Second, do you see symptoms of stress that match emerald ash borer? Third, if you see more evidence pointing to emerald ash borer, such as the beetle itself, the larva itself, etc., the galleries, we definitely want to know. But if you identify an ash tree that has these symptoms that look similar to the damage caused by EAB, please do report it. And these symptoms are shaving of the bark on the outside, that's woodpeckers shaving off the exterior bark because the EAB is so close to the surface and they pluck them out. So they'll shave off that bark. Bark cracks here and here. And I'll hand out some samples to show you. That's, I think, one of the better symptoms that you can catch it pretty early on. They're girdling underneath the bark, separating the bark from the wood, and the bark will split open, and sometimes the crack is large enough you can see the S-shaped galleries underneath the bark. And so looking for those splits, a lot of things can cause splits. So the next thing you want to look for is, does the crown not look good? Is it thinning, such as that far right picture? Are there epicormic shoots from the bottom? Those are the key features. Is it an ash tree? Does it have a thinning crown? Does it have cracks in the bark? Woodpecker shaving? If so, take a closer look and look for those D-shaped exit-holes. Lots of insects get into this tree. Lots of insects are going to create holes. Some are going to look D-shaped. But if you see a tree that's not doing well with an ash tree and a whole bunch of little exit holes, you might want to report it to us, especially if some of those look D-shaped. So now I'll pass out some samples to show you the size of those D-shaped holes, and so you can see that some of the holes don't look perfectly D-shaped. I think I have some first splits in some. So this is a gallery right here. I circled a couple of holes, but there's tons, and actually this one is beetles poking out of it. Don't worry, they're dead. And let's see. Well, that one has splits too. So that very minor split. Okay, next slide. Okay, I want to show you what are not EAB exit-holes. We get calls about these all the time. If they're in a row, it's a type of woodpecker. They're going after sap, not insects. They're not an indicator of anything. I've seen apples riddled from top to bottom with these holes. They're still producing apples. So they don't go very deep, not a big deal. That sapsucker, woodpecker, insects don't coordinate well enough to come out in a row. There are other wood boards, as I mentioned, they may have really round holes, or oval holes of varying size. So if the tree looks pretty healthy and you see holes, I wouldn't report it, don't worry about it. If it has a messy perimeter, that's also a woodpecker. Insects chew very cleanly, like a drill went into it. They chew like a drill bit, basically, whereas woodpeckers are very sloppy. Yep, that's about it. Okay, next slide, please. So this is just for you to look at more in depth later. This is noting the progression of how, and it really depends on the health of the tree at the start of infestation. If it was already a little stressed, it's going to progress a bit faster. But it kind of shows you about how long it takes year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 plus to show that crown thinning. So you can see that that crown thinning really isn't apparent until year 3. So you really want to be looking for those other symptoms, such as the D-shaped hole. If you have an ash tree in your backyard, for example, that you can inspect more frequently, look for those holes well ahead of that thinning. But typically on the larger landscape, the thinning is what clues us into it first. Next slide. Okay, so now what do we do about this? So you specifically, as landowners, land managers, people that maybe discuss what you're doing with other folks, you are planting the seed to share this information that I'm giving you tonight, so that other people are going to be aware of what you learned tonight, what to look for. So first, take stock of your ash trees. Do you have ash trees in your property? How many? What do you plan to do if they get infested? Do you want to preventatively treat? If so, how close is that infestation? Right now, it's just in Washington County. That's our neighbor. Well, I guess I am in Washington County right now. So typically, they can move about 10 miles a year, and that is a very rough average. Because what we have seen from all of our efforts, they did not move 10 miles a year. They moved less than 5. So it really depends on how quickly they need to move to find a food source. That is what the slow spread strategy has been tackling and is very effective. But well ahead of that, you already know where the infestation point is. It's around the Forest Grove area. So plan now in terms of what are you going to do with these trees that you have? Are you going to just let them go and let the insect take them out? We are not suggesting preventative removal unless it's in your best interest to do so. They'll do that for you, and then later you can deal with how you want to remove that tree. But if that's in your best interest, you have the money now to do it, you might just want to get ahead of it. But it could be 5, 10, maybe more years before they actually infest your tree. So you might want to wait it out. That's a decision for you to make. Healthy trees are going to die. They will just die less quickly once attacked by EAB. Avoid planting ash from here on out. All the restoration groups are not happy with this, but it's what we got. That if they're going to be planting ash trees, they need to be aware that it could be a short-term planting and it's not really worth the effort for some other species, or at the very least diversify and have ash be a very small proportion of what's being outplanted. There is systemic insecticide. That's what we advise. There are a lot of products, but the main one that's advised across the board is emamectin benzoate. This product is injected into the tree, and its protection lasts for up to 3 years. The price is variable, but it is pretty much your cheapest option since it lasts so long. Now, you want to treat the tree before you see, I think it's about a 30% crown dieback. So the tree can be infested, but you want to get it really early on in the infestation to prevent the increased infestation, that you can still save it. And then don't remove firewood, ever. And then treatment. So if you have infested trees, what do you do to destroy them? Well, in order to destroy them to the point where the insects that are within those trees cannot escape, or there isn't material left on site that they can still attack. They don't like old dead stuff, but if it's freshly infested, you want to chip or masticate, grind it down to about 1 inch.
Some wet things?
You can have
Oh,
extra material, but that's obviously gonna be very expensive.
freaking out over him.
You will.
The temperature you set it at, you set your oven at,
Here, they just might start.
core temperature reach that 70.
So anyway,
Has she seen any yet?
she saw.
We're looking for it. Biochar is one of the efforts that we're trying to have people attend, just as a product, so that we're not just destroying trees and releasing the carbon.
Anyway,
that's trapped carbon that
I was driving home thinking.
is allocated to other products.
She would do anything today, so.
And most importantly, report infestations. We have these
There's
big
nothing for it to be done.
traps that you might see on the landscape.
Oh.
That's really hard to detect from those traps.
Yeah.
And they're wasteful.
I'm gonna run those over.
So we really get the most amount of information from people
Okay.
like you, your eyes on the
I
ground.
will be
Report
taking
that's
off work.
typically when we
Yeah,
find
I know. Well,
a new area, because
it's our-
somebody visually saw it and reported.
That's the tree keepers,
That's
the
sometimes now.
insects that bug
And we want
trees.
you to report to the
Talking
board of spaces on the hotline and link is on the presentation. Next slide.
inform me.
There are more preventative insecticides. There's a whole list through Oregon Department of Agriculture, but ivermectin benzoate at the lowest dose is your best form of protection, and it will be the cheapest in terms of being the most efficacious and cheapest. Next slide. There are ash alternatives. These are all names that we listed here. However, you know, like I said, they're really expensive one-to-one replacement. So this list that OSU developed has kind of a spread of, is it a wetter site versus a drier site, going to the right? Is it more clay soil or, you know, more loamy soil? So there's some other characteristics that are going to help you choose what tree should go in its place. However, there are non-natives that may serve those purposes even better than some of our natives. Just make sure they're not invasive, obviously. Next slide. Okay, so what is the state doing? And when I say the state of Oregon agencies, but also our federal partners, our local municipalities, everybody really came together very quickly, and that was really great because we knew exactly what to do and when. We learned a lot from other programs in other states, so we were really ahead of the game on this one. So that was really great. So in 2013 to 2016, we had a statewide 8 leaf traps, along the range of ash, looking for this insect. So we're actively looking for it, waiting for it to come. And then we have a training program for folks that are working with trees and, you know, could report back to us if they saw these signs and symptoms. And then we already have that response plan, as I mentioned, that basically just said who's going to do what. And that's just the starting point. It was just a broad template as to who's doing what. From there, we built the program up even larger. One of these programs that we developed was the ash seed collection program, so that we collected ash seed from across its range to preserve its genetic diversity. We saved some of that seed in a repository, so that's in cold storage, so that we can protect it for possible outplantings. And then we have the other half of that we're actually going to plant in infested areas to test for resistance. Now resistance is a long shot and it takes many years to find it, and we may not find it at all for our species of Oregon ash. However, we got to do something and we have to protect our seed. There might be a time in which we can't plant it in some areas, especially if we determine, let's say we need ash trees in this one area that we can't replace with anything else. Let's replant them there and treat them with ivermectin benzoate for the foreseeable future to protect those items of ash. So collecting that seed was really smart. And we're hanging on to that seed to try and keep the seed on the landscape. Next slide. So additional materials that we've been working on. So there's that quarantine in Washington County. Basically no untreated material that's ash can leave Washington County. A few more details there. But that's the main one. And then ongoing monitoring for new infestations. Thousands of trees have been monitored and tagged as possibly infested, definitely infested, slated for removal, or not infested, need to keep monitoring. We always have our eyes on the ground. A lot of agencies are working on this. And then we established biocontrol. We're starting to establish biocontrol agents, 3 wasps that are going to be helpful in reducing the population, not eradicating, but reducing the population. These have been tried and true species. And then SLAM, that's our slow ash mortality program, in which we're reducing populations by creating, for example, trap trees. So we girdle a tree so it's stressed, it's really attractive, it smells really good, and they can detect the stress via the smell. They come in, then we destroy the tree. And so it's just reducing the load of the insect in the immediate area, and that is why this initial hot zone has not spread faster because of this program. And then we have a whole bunch of subcommittees tasked at different outreach that we're providing or developing research, questions we need answered, etc. So there's a lot more that we're doing down the road. This is a program that has grown infinitely and continues to grow as we think of new ways to tackle this insect. Next slide. That's just more detail about the quarantine. We can go to the next slide. And then this is that slow ash mortality program, but also where we're tracking, where we have biocontrols just showing you what we're doing where, but it's encompassing a large area around forest growth. Next slide. So in summary, we've only found this insect in Washington County. Doesn't mean it's not elsewhere, but we are looking for it elsewhere. Our partners in Washington have not seen it yet. We think it's just a matter of time since we are so close to the state of Washington here. It can spread about 10 miles a year, but that is really variable. So far, we've been really successful at keeping it in a smaller area. So we found it in 2022. It's at about 10 square miles right now. So that's 2 years that it could have spread further. It did not. Avoid planting ash. Monitor the current ash that you have for potential signs and symptoms. But ahead of that, have a plan. Think of what you want to do. Do you want to pay to protect these trees? Or think about what are you going to do if that tree dies? Do you need to remove it? How much is that going to cost? Or anything you want to replace it with? And then report potential infestations online. Next slide. Whoa, that's terrible. It doesn't matter because you have this PDF and those are clickable links. So it's just links to all the things that I mentioned, where to report, management guidelines. So the top landing page, that's where we're putting everything that links to all these other agencies' products. And so that's really where we want you to go first. Next slide. Okay, so while we're talking about Emerald Ash Board, do you have any questions that you want me to pause for now? Yeah.
Are you guys working on resistance?
We are working on resistance, so we collected seeds from across the genotypic range, and so we are looking at resistance, but that could take years, and we may not find resistance at all. Yeah.
We have a creek that runs near our house, and we're loaded with ash trees.
Yeah.
And I've been looking, haven't seen anything yet.
If you do have an area that becomes infested and you're going to retain the ash trees, we definitely want to know if there's some trees that are making it through the outbreak. That's just an important.
It's a trail that's managed by a couple of HOAs, and they're clueless, but I'm on one board. So
okay, they're aware of it, and that's something that if they keep those ash trees and they get invested,
during the storms, and I don't know what they did with the fallen wood. I think they just left it there.
That's probably best.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I haven't seen any signs of, but now I know better what
Now you know what to look for.
So you said one of the things you could do is chip up the wood or masticate it, but not spread it around, right?
Well, if you choose 1 inch, the insects are probably dead. Then they're just, even if they're not dead, they'll dry out. There isn't anything to eat. You've destroyed their home. They don't even have real estate to feed. So we're not suggesting you go spray it everywhere, but if you moved it just a little bit further, it's not going to be a big deal. Yeah. Oh, okay. I'll go from right to left. Yeah.
Unfortunately, I have had an extensive experience with this because we have a family farm in Pennsylvania, Northeast. So since I'm way out here, it's hard to keep track of. So I spent like the latest episode was 2 weeks last summer running around with the arborist guy inoculating the trees. We have some wonderful old growth trees, so it always breaks my heart. But there's all these dead stags and stuff now because that was one of the most common trees there. And so it's kind of, people here have to realize that it's really kind of horrible. It's kind of like a forest fire that hit 20% of the trees and killed the 20% and left the others or something like that. And so, well, anyway, I live over kind of near Raleigh Park, another creek with ash trees along it and stuff. And I'm thinking, well, God, 5 years from now, that will be like a wasteland or something. And so.
Could be. Yeah, one thing that's different from eastern states versus here, so I did my grad work in Wisconsin when EAP was really blowing up. And one of the things that it was very impactful to see that on the landscape out there, mainly because they had so many more ash trees. Here, we really don't have a ton of ash trees. And so what that does is it makes it a little harder for the insect to just travel through these corridors. They have to pick up and go, where are there ash trees? Whereas there was more connectivity. And so what I saw was that it moved very quickly in some of those areas. It would work away in one area and take out all of the ash that weren't treated. But here, I think part of it, I don't want us to pat ourselves on the back too much about all the treatment we did and slowing the spread, because there isn't a lot of connectivity of ash. We just don't have a large quantity of ash. We have a little bit more diversity in our broadleaf trees, and then a lot more conifers interspersed. So it's a little bit different. So we've seen some ways in which our state, the beetle has behaved a little bit differently than some of the eastern states. So we took a lot of information from them and then kind of went, oh, well, it's being a little different here, so we have to figure out what it's going to do here.
But it's kind of a thing that builds up momentum and keeps going. So I would caution everybody not to get overconfident about it, because I've seen the results firsthand, and they're really horrible. And so, in fact, your study in Michigan, I was reading, that affects human health, because if you're in an area with lots of ash trees and they're all like dead now, well, that's a whole lot less oxygen you're going to get, a whole lot less shade, a whole lot less everything and stuff. And so there's a lot of other bad results that you don't think of right off the top of your head.
Right, absolutely. It's going to have a lot of trickle down effects. Yeah.
So, question about the insecticide.
Yeah.
So is it harmful to wildlife, and are you recommending insecticide to like?
We can't make any recommendations. We can only tell you what works, and then it's up to the landowner to make the best decision. But this is, I want to be clear, that emamectin benzoate and most of the other products for emerald ash borer are broad spectrum insecticides, meaning that they wipe out anything that's in their path. So there are other wood boring insects and things like that that will be impacted. But when you do a systemic injection, it's mainly retained in the tree as long as it's an injection, not a systemic soil drench or granules, etc. But something that's actually pumped into the tree. It stays within the tissues of the tree. And from what we have learned from previous research, and it's ongoing, well, number one, pollinators don't actively visit ash trees. It's wind pollinated, and this product really doesn't make it to the nectar and pollen in the matter of time that it would need to. However, any insect that's feeding on the tree, feeding the leaves, etc., they're going to be impacted. So you have to weigh it with, well, what's the benefit of this ash tree and keeping it around versus killing the insects in the ash tree? So that's a decision that we can't provide any more guidance than that.
Once the tree is dying, and it is dead or dies, you do recommend removing it anyway. So it's dead, and the insects move down likely.
It's difficult, we're not sure how long it will really hang around. It really depends on tree to tree, but they like a living tree. And so in that, if it's still infested, there's still some green leaves on it, they can still be producing in that tree. And so if you have other adjacent ash trees that aren't infested, you might want to remove that tree. However, once the tree is dead, it's not going to continue being a reservoir. And so it is trapped carbon. And so, like I said, a dead tree is still a useful tree. So if that's not going to impact your other ash trees, or it's not going to fall in a structure, you could leave that tree. Yeah. Yes.
Two-part question. First of all, can you apply that in the off season to keep you have the tree actively growing?
So it does need to be actively growing, because when you're injecting it, that tree needs to pull it up throughout the canopy. And so it needs to be well watered and actively growing.
The second one is on your integrated pest management. You said there's 3 what you're working with?
3, yes.
And are they native compared?
No, and so, but they have been thoroughly tested. I know we're all scared about biocontrol, we've heard in the past, but these have years and years of testing backing them, and even testing with some of our species that we have here. And so, no issues with it, and so, you know, we're going forward with it.
So are there active sites being treated at this point?
Yes, and actually, the biocontrol agents are so effective at finding emerald ash borer that oftentimes you won't, in the traps, you will not find EAVs, but you'll find those wasps. And you'll know they're in the area, and then it helps you zero in on where's the concentration of them, and then you'll find the emerald ash borer. So they're pretty good at finding the insects.
To piggyback on the chip question, we're promoting helping trees with by mulching is those chip drop options safe because those are moving from who knows where.
Yeah, chip drop is something we struggle with because we have found invasives that have traveled in chips via chip drop, not this insect, but we did find evidence of that recently. That's gonna be an uphill battle that we're not gonna be able to prevent something like chip drop, but informing them about these things. And so at their, you know, landing sites that they're looking, that they have staff that go, hey, look at that beetle, should we send that in? That's gonna be helpful. There are some insects that can travel on chip drop loads as well, especially if they have rounds, because sometimes they deliver rounds of branches, not just chip. However, if you chip material down to 1 inch, most insects are not going to live around material. It dries out, it becomes unsuitable habitat, they're shaken free, and then they, you know, especially if it's a larva, they can't just wiggle away somewhere. They're pretty much dead in the water. So it is a lower risk, but yes, there is a very slight risk with chip drop.
Okay, insecticide, what is the success rate, and based on the, damage?
I hesitate to say 100% because nothing is 100%, but if you use the emamectin benzoate, for example, at the lowest dosage, right when the canopy thinning is no more than 20 or 30%, pretty much 100%. You protected that tree, it's not going to die. Yeah. Is there a what?
Ancient history.
Meaning?
It's happened in Rome.
Did this happen in Rome? This insect?
Insect, but I didn't remember, right?
Sure, yeah. Did it affect the country?
But it is such a thing.
Yeah, I mean, always. From this insect in particular, I don't know. I don't know how many ash trees are in Italy. I don't know if they've impacted this. However, emerald ash borer is native to parts of Eurasia. And so it depends on I really am speaking just off the cuff here. So anybody online, don't slaughter me about this, but if there are tree species that have co-evolved with this insect in Italy, of which I'm not aware of what ash trees grow in Italy, then they would not be impacted. Because where this insect is native, it is co-evolved with that tree. And so those species can defend themselves. So that it's basically the same as our native trees, our native insects. So if those trees are unhealthy, stressed, etc., even if they co-evolve together, this insect will still kill those trees. Will they outbreak and spill over to healthy trees? That could possibly happen too. I really just can't speak to what ash trees are present in Italy. I'm the state forest entomologist of Oregon. So I have no idea, but if there are. Oh yeah, absolutely. This happens all the time. As things spread, we lose species. Possibly. So there are other things that could be evolutionary. This is gonna get really off topic and it's gonna like disrupt the next section. But I will just say this. There are some things that we do have some control over to try and protect some of the habitats that we have. This is, and even though it may have happened historically, it doesn't mean it was natural or normal there either. And so what is natural and normal is to have Oregon ash on our landscape. And losing that on our landscape is not normal, even if this is a typical process that invasives move in over time, and that happens. We want to do everything we can to protect this habitat because we don't have anything to replace with Oregon ash in some of these areas, and that is not natural. I don't really understand. No, we have not detected emerald ash borer in Oregon previous to that. Probably due because back then there wasn't this wide expansive international trade of wood products, so we couldn't get here. I have no idea. Feel free to look it up and get back to me.
So you talked about using the treatment. If you see thinning no more than 25% of the canopy, can you use it preventatively before you see any signs?
Yes, we actually suggest that you do that preventatively, but it should give you more time when you have 20 to 30% of a ground dieback. You still have time to act.
You said
Lowest dose on the label.
on the label, not based on the size of the tree.
Right, it's lowest dose on the label, and that product I mentioned applies to systemic is not a generally used pesticide. So it requires a pesticide applicator's license, it's a restricted use pesticide. And to inject it with the type of equipment that's necessary, that's typically through only a few different ISA certified outfits. Arborists that are ISA certified is what we always suggest to go through. They've had proper training, and some of them will require additional training to use this equipment. So I would be wary. There will be some outfits that will put flyers on your door saying we can come in and treat this and that. Make sure they're ISA certified, and if somebody comes by unsolicited, that's usually a bad sign. Hey, I saw you have ash in your neighborhood. Well, yes, well spotted, but that's typically not good business practice. Yeah. Exactly. Okay, on that note, we're running out of time, and I have a bunch more slides, and I'm gonna make it even shorter. And apologies, but we gotta move ahead. So if there are folks online that have questions, I'm gonna just have to keep moving ahead. Okay, so Mediterranean oak borer, this is the next insect that we are working with in Oregon that is a newly detected invasive. We first found it in 2018 in Oregon. It was present in California a little earlier than that. This insect is even smaller, very, very tiny, and it is another wood boring type of beetle that actually does get into the wood. Next slide. So it's native to Europe, North Africa, Middle East. Basically what I'm trying to indicate is there's a wide expanse that is present. A lot of different habitats, a lot of different oak trees that are present. Where it's native there, it's not impacting the oak trees, it's just taking out the stress trees. However, on our landscape, our oak trees are not used to this insect, do not have defenses against this insect, and trees that would have lived are now dying because this insect is infesting them. So as I mentioned, it's been present in California for a little bit. We've learned some things from them, but they are also new to the game, and we're learning together about what we can do to manage this insect so that it doesn't take out more of our oaks. So we first found it in a sentinel trap. We do place traps periodically around pathways, shipping areas, etc., travel pathways, to determine what might be flying out there that we might want to be looking out for management strategies ahead of those insects establishing here. Once they establish in an area, it's really hard to get rid of them. And so in 2018, we found a single adult. Subsequent years, other traps, we found some additional adults. And then starting in 2022, we started seeing trees that were killed, that were infested by this insect, and they are attacking oak trees. Next slide. Okay, same pathways. I'm not going to get into this. They come from overseas shipments, and also interstate travel via nursery, firewood. Also, because this attacks oak, wine barrels often can host this type of insect. And so that's something that we're drilling down on the wine community about inspecting the materials that they're receiving. Next slide. So this insect is very, very tiny, as I mentioned. It attacks oaks. Typically the light red sections of Perkins, so the true oaks, And even the wood boring beetle, it does not feed on wood. It feeds on fungus and it plants in the galleries. Now it's called an ambrosia type of beetle. We have many ambrosia beetles, native, non-native, not typically impactful. They can cause defect in timber, but they don't typically kill the trees that we have with the major beetle ambrosias that we are finding are not that impactful. However, this is one that is quite impactful because the fungus that the vectors that it plants in those galleries to feed its young can actually kill the tree by causing vascular wilt. So it just clogs up those tissues and essentially it's doing the same thing as the previous beetle, and that's cutting off the veins that are feeding the tree water and nutrients. The females are active for much of the year. They're pretty cold tolerant. The males typically hang out in the trees. They don't usually leave because they are flightless. And then there are about 2 to 3 generations a year predicted for Oregon. And beyond that, we don't have a lot of details. We haven't had enough time to follow the generations to determine when exactly they're active. But I will tell you that January 31st of this year, when I was out sampling, I saw them crawling outside the tree. Now it's very cold. They don't want to be outside the tree. They don't want to leave the tree. If the food source is good, the tree is still alive, or thriving to support their fungus, they're going to stay in the tree. They just come out periodically, and that's likely what they're doing. They weren't just actively flying away from the tree. Next slide. So basically in their native range, as I mentioned, they attack the stress trees, but here our trees are exposed to this insect. Next slide. We have 3 main oak species in our state. So far, we've only found it in Oregon white oak, but we are looking at those other oaks as well. And the reason why we found it in Oregon white oak only is possibly because we've only found it in a tri-county area, essentially. And so that's where the majority of our Oregon white oak is. Doesn't mean it won't move to the other species of oaks that we have. Next slide. I don't need to explain to this group the importance of white oak. Oregon white oak lived up to 500 years. It's a primary overstory in our savannas. It's extremely drought tolerant, and with increasing temperatures, less consistency in precipitation, having this tree species on our landscape is essential. It's just one of the few trees that we can point folks to say, in times of drought, this is a species that will survive. So having this other stressor on this tree is really impactful. Also, this is a really important tree ecologically. It provides mass for a variety of different mammals. Also, birds are utilizing this tree for nesting, for food sources. And because it is deciduous, it escapes annual defoliators. So a lot of the defoliators that attack oak to make it look unsightly, but they're not killing the buds. And the tree will just drop the leaves and go, haha, I'm going to start fresh next year with new leaves. Attack me then. And so it's a really durable tree over a long span of time. Next slide. Okay, so I really want to drill the point home about our drought conditions. Now, this is a little bit older of a map. Where we're at now is about 10% of the state is in moderate level of drought. Now, we've had some pretty good moisture, it feels like. It's been a little cooler, right? Well, not relative to the 30-year average. So despite the way it feels, because it's very easy for us to get accustomed every year to what the conditions are, we forget what did it feel like this time, this place 15 years ago? Different. We have less consistent precipitation. Anybody with eyes can see in our mountains that our snowpack is diminishing. We have it less and less. If you're a skier, your ski season's getting shorter. And so it's not that we're not getting precipitation, we're just not getting enough, or it's not consistent enough. And then on average, our temperature is increasing over time. So that we do have some peaks and falls in terms of our temperature, but on average, it is increasing over time. Next slide. So I want to drill down on the diagnosis. Same with Emma Lashford, know what to look for. First thing, is it an oak tree? Second thing, is a portion of the canopy dead? Not a few leaves here and there, a whole branch or a whole portion of the crown is going to be red. From there, take a closer look at the base of the tree. Do you see white or pale boring dust, sawdust? This is called frass. The insect's burrowing in and kicking out this frass. It'll be in lock furrows around the base of the tree. Look for that frass material. You may see holes, but they're really tiny. The next thing that I would look for are the galleries. However, a lot of galleries look similar, and I don't expect most people to see those. In addition, you have to do some destructive sampling unless the branches have fallen on the ground and you can see those black stained galleries. So it's typically like a single vein that goes into the sapwood and it's stained black. So I'll hand out some samples so you can see the insect itself. It's really tiny. I don't expect you to identify it with your eyeballs, but you can see how small it is. And then you'll see these holes that are black stained. So it dives into the tree on the side, and then it will create a branched out gallery. Sometimes they'll intersect, and it's just in the sapwood that you can see here, and it's black stained. Okay, next slide. Okay, and I want to show you what is not Mediterranean oak borer, because we get a lot of false reports about this as well. Because oaks are long-lived and they're exposed to stressors year after year, storm damage, other insects, vertebrates, etc. And so there's a lot of oaks that don't really look great if you get up close, but they're still thriving, they're living, they're doing great. So first of all, storm breakage. If you see a dead branch on a tree, well, just look closer and determine, did it break from a storm? That could be the reason. Do you see any cracks around it? If not, it's probably storm breakage. Fungal conch, so big fungus on the base of the tree. There are a lot of roots and stem loss that can affect the tree. Look for those as well. And then sometimes Mediterranean oak borer will attack those trees that have those rods as well. So if you see the frass, definitely let us know that as well. But be looking for other things that could have impacted the tree. There are a very common site is number 4 in the bottom middle. Just a few leaves throughout the canopy are turning orange or red. That's very common. It's oak galls, so there are insects that create galls. You've all seen the big oak apples. There are various other galls that are present in the tree. They're attacking, and then the tissues just swell up in response. It's not harming the tree at all, not a big deal. Squirrels will dig after those grubs, killing the twig. That's what you're seeing in the canopy, but it's not harming the tree. It's usually really dispersed in the canopy. They drop the leaves every year, not a big deal. There are many other wood-boring insects that are getting into these trees. Woodpeckers are going up to the trees. If you don't see a whole portion of the crown that is dyed back and some evidence of frass, sometimes if there's ivy on it, you don't pull the ivy back to see all that sawdust. But it could be a variety of these other things if you don't see large scale dieback of the crown and frass. Next slide. All right, so this is just a little bit of management for Mediterranean oak borer. We don't have a lot of management strategies for this one, unfortunately. We're still learning what might work, but in the meantime, promoting tree health is essential. That can actually protect it against this insect. What we're seeing as this insect is attacking trees that seem to have a little bit of stress. And so even when we have really dry summers, this is a drought tolerant tree, giving a tree one overnight plug of water, a slow, constant drip, and we do have a water guide there, and it is a lot of water, but doing it for one night in July, maybe one night in August, twice, 2, 3 times at the hottest part of summer, that may be enough to help your tree survive and withstand infestation from this insect. Preventative removal of oak is not advised, same with ash. We don't want folks to go in and start removing trees without a plan. If you do have an infested tree, cutting it down to the base, all the way to the ground, don't leave a stump, chip or burn it on site. Now, oaks are huge, and we realize this is untenable. This is very expensive, so we're really scrambling to try to come up with some other methods. But we don't know how long that tree can be a reservoir. How long can that tree be dead and those moths continue to attack the tree and spread to other trees? We just don't know. So we are advising that if you have an infested tree, and if it is in your means to do so, to destroy it on site. You can also cover it and transport it to an incinerator. Obviously, that's going to have great costs as well. And then anytime you're working with infested trees, sterilizing equipment, because it's not the insect that's being transported, it's the fungus, and we're not sure how long it can live outside of the tree. So much more to be learned. One other thing I will mention, if you have trees that have very large unsupported branches, those could crack and break in a storm. Other insects or fungus will then enter because they like that stress point, and it could really stress out the tree, making it more inviting to Mediterranean oak borer. So if they're If you have a large oak on site, has a really big unsupported branch, support it or remove it preventatively. That might help save your tree, especially from fungal infection, because they do need an opening to enter. Next slide. Okay, this is the current infestation. So we have found one infested tree that's since been destroyed in Troutdale. The rest are in Wilsonville. We're still looking to see where else it might be present. We have found beetles and traps in Marion, Clackamas, Washington, and Multnomah counties. So likely there are trees that have been infested in those areas as well that we just have not detected as being infested because they're still alive. We're not seeing any evidence of dieback. This map is available online. You can follow along and see what we're finding. And when you report to us, it goes on this map. It's us looking, it's you looking, whoever has eyes on the ground, we put it on these maps that are available to the public. Next slide. So what's happening next? Ongoing mapping to look for more infestation, especially outside of the known area of Clackamas County. And then field trainings to help folks diagnose, to assist us, expanding our tracking efforts to determine where else it's present, where it might be coming in from, and then emergence timing. So I did that this year, looking at when does it wake up, when is it active. And so the evidence is that it wakes up very early, but it's not really active until the temperatures increase to like maybe closer to 70 degrees during the day. And we're also testing some other management strategies, systemic insecticides paired with a fungicide because it's the insect and the fungus that's impacting. Any repellents efficacy, there's a repellent that I'm testing to determine if that can try and prevent the tree from being attacked because they just don't like the smell of it. And then burying the material, that is something that is shown to be potentially useful, that if you can bury infested material, that can be cheaper than chipping or burning. And then partial canopy removal. If you give it the start of the infestation, because they typically attack at the top and then move down. If you see that top branch dying back, remove that branch, and then maybe you solve the issue. However, we don't know what is attracting the beetle to that tree. Is it because it's already stressed? So if you remove that branch, will they then just come back and attack a different branch? That we don't know. And then we want to learn more about how the pathogen is spread. Not only is it spread by the beetle, but could it be spread through underground root grafting? Other pathogens can spread that way, and we're looking into that as well. And I think that's the last slide. Okay, those are all the resources. And I've taken up more than enough of your time, but if you have questions, I'll stick around. This one, we don't know where it came in from, overseas, so we're not sure how. We're trying to determine where it might be coming from. No, not likely. And it likely didn't come up from California either because we did some genotyping and our population came from a different population in Europe than the California one did. So at least two separate introductions.
You said this got into the wood, you see the black stain.
Yeah.
We use a lot of pallets, and you mentioned the wine barrels. Could that fungus could travel even though the wood's used, the fungus is in that wood?
If it's not heat treated, possibly. Yeah, a lot of pallets and a lot of oak staves are treated before used for those products, but not all. And so treated in terms of typically it's heat treatment, and usually like pallets and stuff, they're stamped. But things, pathogen, we don't know if they withstand some of that heat treatment, we're not sure.
So if you're using some dried oak, you're more likely to kill that.
More than likely, because fungus isn't super sturdy, this type of fungus, the two types, but we don't know that yet. So I can't speak to that. It's always good practice, but so far we don't know.
You mentioned this one emergence, temperature is about 70 degrees.
With the rainy fall. Yeah.
Is there something similar with the ash borer?
Oh, in terms of when they will emerge? So yes, it's also temperature, so they have to have what's called degree days. And so that's an accumulation of temperatures over time. So it's not just that let's say it's 30 degrees every day, and then you have a 70-degree day, they're all of a sudden gonna wake up. You know, they have to have a build in temperature, so they have like, let's say 2,000 degrees that have built over time, and then they can wake up. They have had enough time for their development. Yeah, and the 70 degrees, that's just based on observations in California, but none of us, California or Oregon, have done intensive testing in terms of like temperature probes. When are they immediately coming out? I was just wandering around one day and saw January 31st that they were outside the tree, and I went, oh no, field season started. I better set out some traps. So they could be active year round. We don't know yet. Yes. Are you going to ask me about Italy again? Because I don't know.
I think it's changing.
Yeah.
So that must affect your work.
Absolutely. In fact, this is one of the first talks I've had in a long time where I didn't start with 5 drought slides, because it's always an underlying stressor across our entire state, affecting all of our trees, even our drought tolerant ones. Because even if you see, for example, have you all seen western red cedar dying back in large pockets? We're seeing that, especially along, or not especially, but even along areas with streams, shaded areas, and people go, well, there's water right there. How are these drought stressed? Well, it's less water than what they've been used to. So, you know, it's a hard sell sometimes when you still see moisture, when you still get rain. It's just not enough because it's easy for us every year to acclimate. And there's a really great, Oregon Water Resources Department has a monthly email they send out if you just go to their website that summarizes where we are in terms of temperature and precipitation from the last month and the next month projected forward. And I like to look at it to just like, okay, recalibrate. It's not how I feel the conditions are, it's what are the actual measurements saying. Yeah, I'm frankly, I'm sick of talking about drought climate change. It's stressful. Yeah.
This is a great presentation.
Thank you.
It was really focused. If we go to the website, will it discuss other kinds of concerns for like conifers or?
Oh, yeah. So the very first slide, my title page, has our Forest Health website. We have a lot of materials there, so it can be hard to focus. And there isn't enough about diseases. We've had some change in staffing, and so those are still being built. But I do have in the insect section, it says start here. And it's focused mainly on our native species, mainly on timber species, because I work in forestry. So it's not covering things like, you know, well, I do have a sheet on big leaf maple, but it's mostly trees that are the majority on our landscape. And then I'm only picking out the major insects that are impacting them. So if you go there, it's kind of a quick dirty key, but there's a lot more materials there. And from there, we link all over the place to other folks that create materials as well.
Trying to protect the growth of homeland ponderosa.
Yes. So,
Like that.
yes, and the main thing I would say about that, so if IPS beetle, there's a fact sheet about that. Anytime you create flash material, anything 3 to 8 inches, you do pruning, limbing, destroy it within 2 months if it's spring and summer, because they will infest and then kill the tops of your tree and then the rest of the tree. Reduce density, those are big ones. We told everybody years back, plant Willamette Valley pine, and now the market dropped. And so now there's a ton of really dense Willamette Valley pine with no market value and no reason for people to pre-commercially thin or thin out that density. And so now, even though it's a pine, very drought stressed. Now, Willamette Valley pine is the west side subspecies of ponderosa pine, so it can withstand, you know, more moist conditions, but it also does need moisture more than east side ponderosa. So, but it is the main one that I would look at that fact sheet. Yeah.
I wonder what effect recent storms and all the downed trees, did it have a good effect, a bad effect, no effect? Yeah.
I mean, you know, nobody likes to see a bunch of broken trees, and when a tree breaks open, fungus can get in, so that's a negative impact. When a tree breaks, it releases attractive volatiles, mainly ethanol, that insects can smell and go, that tree is stressed, I'm gonna go and attack that tree. If the trees were healthy before the storm, they have a better chance of tolerating the damage that they incurred. But some of them just aren't gonna make it. However, all is not lost. Even if the top breaks out of the tree, that's still wildlife habitat, it's still trapped carbon. There's some birds that can nest in it. You may get a honeybee hive in the hollow of that stem. So there's still some benefit, but it's good and bad. Yeah. Okay, so I think with that, I'm gonna let you all go home now. Thank you very much. Well, thanks for inviting you. Great. And, yeah, I sent that PDF. If you don't get it, just let me know. I'll find another way to share it. So, it's a lot. It is a lot.